dynamics once he starts deploying that in a more material way?
First of all, thank you for adding about turnout, because it is absolutely true that the 8 to 10% that are the pure independents, that they vote, they pay attention less, they pay attention later, and they end up voting in lower numbers. So that then the 90, 91, 92% that are partisans on one side or the other. So good point. Thank you for making that. Look, it's always better to have more money than the other candidate, and the more you can have, the better. But in politics, basically, there's a law of diminishing returns, where there's a point where you have a lot of money, and that the incremental value of every additional dollar isn't that great. And the other thing is, the higher the visibility of the office, the less important campaign spending is. And that on a state rep race, a city council race, or whatever, lower, where there's less news coverage, campaign spending is a lot more important there. But in a presidential race, I mean, let me ask you, what could a TV ad possibly do or say that would change somebody's mind one way or the other about Joe Biden or Donald Trump? They've already got 10 million data points there. And so money, I'm happy for the Biden people that they're going to have more money. And that's always makes, you have to make fewer choices. But in a presidential race, money is not that determinative, but it sure is better to have it than not. And Trump, they're going to have plenty of money. I mean, you have candidate money, in other words, the Trump for president. You've got super PAC money. You've got various other entities and party things. I mean, there's a lot of money sloshing around this system.
I've only got about a minute here, Charlie Cook. I have to ask you about rhetoric, as I just asked you irresponsibly if this race was already over, knowing that so much can happen in 7 to 8 months' time. We heard again from Donald Trump over the weekend about not just the bloodbath reference, but migrants. He called them animals again. Democrats, he said, this is a quote, Democrats said, please don't call them animals. I said, no, they're not humans. They're animals, unquote. Is this kind of thing moving the needle for anybody, or does everybody know Donald Trump for whom he is? To your point, this is a former president we're talking about.
I think Donald Trump is much more, he's got part of the job down pat, and that is throwing red meat to his base and keeping them jacked up. And there's just nobody better than that. Making arguments that would appeal to swing voters, maybe not so much. But he may be banking on that group vote turning out in lower numbers. But the thing is, take the border. I think a lot of this is sort of more of a competence thing. I mean, you can't see the video of dozens and dozens or hundreds of people come over the border and say, geez, boy, that really is efficiency and competence, and they're doing a heck of a job. It undermines the sort of effectiveness of the administration. And
well, Charlie, I wish we had more time, and we'll find it next time. Charlie Cook with us on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg. Make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, watch us live on YouTube, and listen anytime at Bloomberg.com.
Friday, we zero in on March jobs.
Headline unemployment rate of 3.9%.
With fully employed America.
Will the numbers affect how the Fed views the labor market?
What's the why for 200,000 per month?
Continued resilience in the job market.
The March Jobs Report on Bloomberg Surveillance.
Job growth blew past expectations.
Markets on the move here.
Friday morning at 8:30. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And always on Bloomberg 1130. Context changes everything.
Without the ones like you, who work tirelessly to keep things running, everything would suddenly stop. Hospitals, factories, schools, and power plants, they all depend on you. No matter the weather, emergency, or time of day, you're the ones who get it done. At Grainger, we're here for you with professional-grade industrial supplies. Count on real-time product availability and fast delivery. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
When you get your news from Bloomberg, you don't just get the story. You get the story behind the story. How your EV's battery may not be as green as it seems. Why a decrease in global birth rates could send countries scrambling to increase immigration. How pond scum could change high-end fashion. You get context. And context changes how you see things, how you change things. Because context changes everything. Go to Bloomberg.com to get context.
What could you do if your data was working for you and not against you? With Bloomberg delivering enterprise data directly to your systems, you get easy access to the details you want, optimized for higher level analysis, and financial data experts committed to helping you maximize your every move. Our data is made for more, so you can show the world what you're made of. Visit Bloomberg.com/enterprise data to learn more.
The countdown has begun. This May, 1,000 global leaders will gather in Doha for the Qatar Economic Forum powered by Bloomberg, held in conjunction with our official partners, the Qatar Ministry of Commerce and Industry and Media City Qatar, and premier sponsor QNB. Join heads of state, influential ministers, and leading CEOs to make new connections and gain unique insights. Learn more at QatarEconomicForum.com.
Now, your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
Some rain and wind out there for the rest of today, with temperatures mostly between 45 and 50. Tonight, periods of rain and breezy and low 40s overnight. Tomorrow, mainly cloudy skies with a few scattered rain showers. High temperature 45 to 50. Showers quit tomorrow night in the 30s. Maybe a brief shower coming up on Friday afternoon. Otherwise, Friday is partly sunny to mostly cloudy and around 50. This is Gary Best here with your 3-day weather forecast on Bloomberg 1130.
Coming up on Balance of Power, Donald Trump doubles down on his bloodbath language. We'll assemble our political panel and get their take on those words next. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks are higher as Fed Chair Jay Powell sticks to his wait-and-see tone. Powell did not break any new ground, but Wall Street got some relief from his reviews that recent inflation numbers did not materially change the overall picture. The 10-year right now, 4.36%. The 2-year, 4.68%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all higher. S&P up 18, up by about 0.4%. Dow Industrials up 47, up 0.1%. NASDAQ higher by 80, up by 0.5%. Again, the 10-year now yielding 4.36%. Spot gold up 0.5%, higher by $11.50 the ounce to $22.92. And West Texas Intermediate crude closing on $86 a barrel. WTI up 0.8% right now, 85.83 on crude. Ford's U.S. auto sales rose 7% in the first quarter on a strong demand for gas-electric hybrids, despite a laborious launch of a redesigned F-150 pickup truck. Ford shares right now, they're up by 2.6%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. Powell speaks. S&P up 18, up by about 0.4%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here they are. We've got Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York for us today. Thank you so much. I am Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio, where, of course, we are keeping an eye on the market reaction to the words of Fed Chair Jay Powell earlier. But speaking of the markets, we did just get a headline, Joe, a red headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal. This is the proxy battle with Disney. Nelson Peltz not victorious. Disney's Bob Iger and the rest of company management has won that proxy vote over Nelson Peltz and Trian Asset Management with the board election. That, of course, is a meeting that began roughly 23 minutes ago. We did know coming into the meeting, Joe, that Disney had secured the backing, and Iger and his team had secured the backing of prominent shareholders, the largest shareholders, including Vanguard and BlackRock. So perhaps this vote is not all too surprising, the ultimate outcome, but this is definitely a loss for Nelson Peltz, a win for Iger and his management team.
Pretty remarkable here. That didn't take long. This meeting's still underway here. The red headline that Kaylee just mentioned, we did hear reporting that Bob Iger had the votes, and he had some awfully prominent people behind him, not just some huge institutional investors, but George Lucas himself, who of course sold the Star Wars franchise to Bob Iger and helped to make this kind of the media empire that it has become with Marvel and so many other brands that he pulled together. The question, Kaylee, as you know all too well, comes down to not just recovering from the pandemic, the theme park business that's been pretty strong, but what to do with streaming and how to make that a profitable enterprise.
Absolutely. And of course, that's one of the concerns that Nelson Peltz has had, why he was trying to get on the board to initiate some of the changes he would like to see, in part relating to that business. I would note that Disney shares are down right now on the day, down by just over 1%. We saw a small leg lower on this news, which again is not all too surprising, Joe, but it does raise questions of, now that this proxy battle may be done and dusted, still the trajectory of the company going forward, considering we're talking about a win for Bob Iger, who has left Disney before and then had to be brought back. And there is still a major question around succession plans and what a post-Iger Disney ultimately is going to look like.
I wonder if we do learn more about that here today, remembering as well, this is a stock that's actually been up significantly over the past couple of months. Left for dead about a year ago. This thing was down in the low to mid 80s at one point, Kaylee, and here in the 120s, it's been looking a lot better. And we've seen a lot of the price targets increased with this very moment in mind. And now that this has happened, maybe this is a bit of a sell the news situation.
Yeah, down about 1% again today, but up 35% to your point, Joe, year to date thus far. We want to turn now to Geeta Ranganathan, who covers Disney for us over at Bloomberg Intelligence. Geeta, I know you've probably been paying attention to what actually happened in the meeting, but now we do know the result of the vote. Iger and Disney management victorious. Nelson Peltz dealt a blow here. What happens next now that this is over?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a vote of confidence on Bob Iger. I think it removes like an immediate distraction. I mean, this has been a top agenda item for Bob Iger ever since Nelson Peltz started agitating in October of last year. And he has really devoted a lot of time and a lot of resources, Kaylee, to this campaign. I mean, he has taken it personally. They've spent something like upwards of $40 million. It's one of the most expensive proxy battles ever fought. And he's done a lot of things actually to take control of the narrative at Disney. But in terms of any near-term changes, I think it's just going to be business as usual. Obviously, he comes out victorious. I think this is definitely going to supercharge him and his efforts. But there is, going to be continued, watch on kind of how Disney performs. But obviously, for today, I think Bob Iger is definitely very relieved.
When you say, Geeta, how Disney performs, you mean the stock, right? This is only going to last as long as the stock holds up. If we go back down to the 80s again, I suspect we're having another conversation about Bob Iger's future and the direction of the company strategically.
They do have a lot of catalysts in place that should, serve in kind of keeping up that momentum. So, the two of the core areas of their business, and Disney is a huge diversified conglomerate, but parks is one of their core growth engines. And they really have put parks on a very, very solid financial footing. So parks brings in about 70% of their profit. They're investing very, very aggressively in this part of their business. They're spending about $60 billion over the next 10 years. They're going to add capacity. They're going to increase, attendance. And it's going to bring in substantial amounts of profits and really kind of set the company up for strong earnings growth. Now, that is something that you really want to see with a company like this. I mean, just this year, we're going to see about 25% EPS growth in the Walt Disney Company. And I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see, again, sustained, 20, like double-digit EPS growth. That's unheard of, like in the media world. So obviously, Bob Iger has taken a lot of right steps. And I think we're going to see that continued momentum in the stock price as well.
Yeah, I mean, since he's returned, we've seen the elimination of 8,000 jobs. He's cut over $7 billion in costs. Obviously, when you reduce costs, that helps shore up the bottom line, as you're speaking to, Geeta. But some of the ideas that Nelson Peltz and Trian Asset Management were bringing to Disney, things that they wanted to see corrected, even if they're not going to get the board seats that they wanted, they still do own a sizable stake in this company. And I wonder how you think about the influence they may still have on decisions moving forward, and if this is going to catalyze even further change at Disney, regardless of whether or not this proxy vote ultimately panned out for Peltz.
I agree with you, Kaylee. I think it actually is, in a way, it is a good thing. Yes, it was a distraction, but it has definitely expedited the process of transformation and change at Disney. I mean, we can see that in the stock price. And I think what we're really going to see with the board this time around is obviously succession has kind of been a failure. And I think in many ways the board has been responsible for this, especially with, the whole Bob Chapek kind of fiasco. And I certainly think that the board this time has to kind of take a much more rigorous, a much more disciplined, a much more thorough approach when it comes to, vetting possible candidates and choosing an appropriate successor for Bob Iger. So that's an area where I think we're definitely going to see some real tangible momentum.
We spoke earlier, Geetha, about some of the allies that Bob Iger gathered throughout this proxy battle, institutional investors, some bold names like George Lucas, folks from the entertainment industry who backed his effort, but also the Disney family. I wonder to what extent you can tell us how the family impacted this outcome.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really, when you kind of look at the composition of Disney shareholders, right, this is one of the few companies in the world that has such a huge base of retail individual investors, right? Almost 40% owned by, mom and pop kind of shareholders. Mm-hmm. And everybody kind of identifies with the brand. I mean, this is an iconic company. Even Nelson Peltz, who kind of spoke today on the shareholder meeting, said, I mean, this is a company that is so beloved, known for its brands, iconic, is such a good company when it comes to creativity and storytelling. And so I think that definitely played a huge part when it came, to the votes today. I mean, we know that Bob Iger encouraged all of his people to kind of call all the voters to, to really kind of make this decision. And I agree with you that definitely played into today's decision as well.
Geetha, finally, as you talk about the iconic brand that is Disney, as you were talking a moment ago about the kind of profit expansion we are seeing at Disney that is unusual for other media companies, how should we be thinking about Disney in relation to its peer group, knowing that in many ways it is different than, say, a Netflix or another streaming company in that it has much more beyond Disney Plus, but what comparison should we be making here, and how strong would you characterize its position in the face of competitors like that in its many different businesses?
I think it is definitely one of the most strongly positioned companies in the old media landscape. And I mean, dealing with these kind of TV headwinds, cord cutting, people kind of are making this mass shift to streaming. It's not unique to Disney. It's happening across the whole media world, whether it's Warner Brothers, Discovery, Paramount. Disney has a little bit of an advantage because they have that sizable exposure, not just to TV. I mean, TV brings in only about 20-25% of their profits. They have that sizable exposure to parks, which really helps them. And then, of course, they've managed, I think, that transition to streaming a little bit better. So they obviously have more scale, they have better brands, they have better content. So that kind of helps set them apart a little bit. And as it comes to, catching up with Netflix, I think it's only a matter of time. Obviously, they were a little bit of a late entrant. They only came on the scene in 2019. Having said that, though, I think they've really built up a lot of scale and they've done it pretty quickly. And what we're going to see now is not so much building subscriber scale. It's really going to be more in terms of building profitability. But I think eventually we are going to get to those double-digit margins, which Disney has promised. And so that will kind of put them, I don't know if it'll put them on an equal footing with Netflix, but they're definitely catching up to Netflix pretty quickly.
Geetha, thank you so much for your analysis in the clutch here at Bloomberg Intelligence. We can always count on our colleagues at BI, Kaylee. Fascinating to watch the stock here now near its lows of the session, following what many folks saw coming. There was reporting last evening that Nelson Peltz was headed for a loss here and that Bob Iger would win this proxy battle. And indeed, that is what has happened here, Kaylee. Just another breaking story that we're following today from Washington to Wall Street.
The news never stops, Joe. As always. And of course, the news we were following here in Washington today, in addition to everything that's happening in financial markets and with specific companies, is it is the aftermath of a series of primaries. Yes, debatable to the extent to which further primaries matter when Trump and Biden already have mathematically locked up their respective Republican and Democratic nominations. But still, Wisconsin, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York yesterday, those voters made their voices heard, and there may be some troubling signs for both candidates in the results that we saw.
And if you're a viewer or listener to this program, this will sound familiar to you. The uncommitted vote for Joe Biden that he has seen certainly through the Midwestern states with an eye on his Israel policy. For Donald Trump, it's been this Nikki Haley vote, kind of a protest vote in disguise, that is really taking form here a little bit more because she, wasn't on the ballot when these states started voting. So we assemble our panel. Glad to say Rick Davis is with us, Bloomberg politics contributor, Republican strategist, joined by Democratic strategist Jim Kessler, of course, founder at Third Way. It's great to have both of you gentlemen with us and appreciate the time here. I'd like to pick through each of these one by one. And Jim Kessler, I'll start with you on Joe Biden. When you look at the numbers here, obviously we have two presumptive nominees and no one is questioning who's going to be going to the convention here. But the uncommitted ballot option took between 8 and 15% away from Joe Biden's results in the states where it was an option. In Rhode Island, it was almost 15%. Is this something Joe Biden needs to worry about, or again, a game in the primary cycle?
I would worry about other things more. Like, look, if you look at post Super Tuesday, when really the race is uncontested, Joe Biden has won 89% of post Super Tuesday votes. Donald Trump has won 79% of post Super Tuesday votes. I think they both have work to do. I think Donald Trump has more work to do. Some of the votes that Biden has lost, they're freebies. People are like, it's a protest vote. I think if Biden is trying to get those votes rather than getting votes in the center and, maybe trying to do better on the border, on crime, on those issues, I think that would be a mistake. I think he's got to aim for the center. And if he loses some votes on the left because of Israel and Hamas, he loses some votes on the left.
Well, but Jim, I wonder if when we're thinking about the left, we're thinking about more specific demographics than that, though, when we think about this protest vote, right? And I take your point about how people may view this as a freebie because it's a primary election, not a general one. But there's also the question of whether those voters are still going to turn out for him in the general, specifically young voters. This is a demographic that was crucial to getting Biden elected the first time around in 2020. And when you look at the breakdown of where these uncommitted or uninstructed votes were showing up, it's college towns. This is a pattern we have seen repeatedly. How concerned should he be about young people and making sure that the young people actually turn out on Election Day?
He should be concerned. And he's got a message to send to college students. He's done things on student debt. He's done a lot of things on the environment. He's done things on LGBT issues. He's done things on abortion. If that's not enough for some young voters on the left, then that's the way it's going to be. And then the votes he has to gain are those Nikki Haley voters. You can't lean too far to the left to try and get those voters because you're going to lose votes from the center. This election is going to be won or lost in the center.
Rick Davis, walk us over to Donald Trump's side of the race here. If Nikki Haley's polling at least 10% in all four states we're talking about here, we may have set a new baseline. That's less than certainly she was polling in the early states. Is that a write-off for the Trump campaign? Is it a factor that he should worry about?
In Mar-a-Lago, is worried about this primary vote at this point. Most voters know if they're going to go to a Republican primary, they know the state of the primary. They know that Biden or Trump's already got it locked up. And so they have different motivations for casting a vote against him. I've never seen a primary vote like this influence a general election. In other words, by and large, Republicans come back to the Republican fold, Democrats come back to the Democratic fold. And then you have the issues of intensity. And intensity will matter probably more to Biden than to Trump. Trump has a very fired up base. His base is strong. It's shown that it has the ability to turn out. And his problem are these swing voters. And those aren't necessarily Haley voters right now. We haven't seen these voters show up as swing voters in the past. Sure, some of them are suburban women. And we see today in the campaigns really targeting suburban women. And so there is an emerging of a general election narrative, which is what we left off of 4 years ago, which is highly likely suburban women decide how this election is going to be determined. and whether or not Donald Trump can convince suburban women that he can protect them.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden can convince suburban women that he can protect their rights.
Well, Rick, we heard that from Donald Trump when he was speaking in Grand Rapids, Michigan yesterday. He talked about how, and he called them suburban housewives, how they like him because they know he will protect them from things like crime. That was just one of many things he said in those remarks. Joe has alluded to this several times already this hour, doubling down on the bloodbath phrasing, talking about the bloodbath at the border. There's a whole website now dedicated to Biden's bloodbath. He again referred to migrants as animals. Is that going to help him with those voters that you are talking about, with those suburban women and other Haley voters that he might need to win over? Or is that doubling down only effective with his base?
Yeah, this is a classic good versus evil, right? Joe Biden's campaigning on the fact that he's actually turned the corner and America's better now than it was under Trump. And Trump is exactly the opposite. Oh, my God, America is in a disastrous place, overrun by criminals. They've unleashed their mental patients and drug addicts and thieves and murderers into our country. No one is safe anywhere. And with only I can save you in the future. And so these two contrasts, both on policy and on style, are going to play out. And I would say it's so early to have this hot a rhetoric. I mean, it's like Donald Trump can't help himself. He continues to pile on with incredibly high rhetoric like bloodbath, and now it was applied initially to the car business, and now it's being applied to your security at the border. I can't wait to see what bloodbath happens next. I do think you run the risk, if you're Trump, of overusing these really hot adjectives, because what's going to happen sooner or later is people just become immune to it. And, oh, that's just another Donald Trump bloodbath comment. If it's used once in an important speech or at a time in very important in the campaign, it has an enormous impact, I am certain. But if it's used every single day at every single rally, it just loses its impact.
That's interesting. I wonder if it's already happening, Rick. It's a great point. Jim, I wonder what Joe Biden does about it as well. Recalling the way he embraced the term Bidenomics, which was critical, something that was in a Wall Street Journal column, and he kept hearing it enough that he said, okay, let's own this thing. And he kind of did. Donald Trump's essentially done the same thing with the bloodbath remark here, except to Kaylee's point, the RNC website, they bought the URL, BidenBloodbath.com. What does the president or his campaign do with it?
Well, I guess it's not about the auto industry anymore. Look, I think it is imperative let's put aside the words bloodbath, okay? Because Democrats are going to run to the outrage all the time, and I don't think that works either.
Yeah.
Democrats and Joe Biden think they have an ace in the hole with suburban women in particular on abortion, and they do. But they can't turn the immigration and crime issue and change the subject to abortion. They have to win back some of those voters who disapprove of Biden on the border and on crime issues. And they do have a story to tell. The bipartisan border deal that Trump killed because it would have helped Joe Biden and would have helped the country. They have to tell that story and not change the subject, because if you can draw closer on the border and on the crime issue and close that gap with Trump, he will win this election. But you can't just change the subject to abortion.
Well, Rick, if we're talking about the issues that resonate with voters, sure, we have seen repeatedly in the midterms in 2020 and special elections since then that abortion does have the ability to galvanize voters, to drive turnout, and overwhelmingly, those rights have been protected every time they've come up on the ballot. But it's not ranking as highly in terms of especially swing state voters and what they're prioritizing. It's the border and the economy. How do you think these different arguments are ultimately going to measure up?
Yeah, I think that anybody who ignores the economy as the number one issue is missing the reports that we're seeing in all the swing states. It's still the economy. That's what's really pinching people who are swing voters. That's what people are going to make their initial decisions on as to where to sit on this ballot, whether it's Biden or Trump or some third party. And so I think that all this rhetoric around, these other issues is playing around on the edges of American politics. That being said, just recently this week, a ballot initiative in Arizona on abortion to change the state constitution was collected enough signatures to make it on the ballot. Those kinds of things do have a tendency to drive turnout amongst certain groups. So if there is a less intense feeling around abortion issues, but you have a ballot initiative where people are spending money, time, and effort campaigning on it, and it's going to be on the ballot, that could change the dynamics in a state where, Joe Biden only won by 10,000 votes last time. So I think you got to look underneath the hood and see beyond the economy what else is driving turnout at the state level.
All right, Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributor, and Jim Kessler, Democratic strategist, joining us from Third Way. Thank you both so much for being with us. And Joe, as we run through the various issues that are weighing on the minds of voters, this brings us back to the uninstructed, uncommitted question that we know showed up in Democratic primary voters yesterday, especially, and that is Israel and Gaza and the Biden administration's handling of this, especially in light of the development in recent days, the deaths of 7 humanitarian aid workers from World Central Kitchen. This morning, Jose Andres, of course, the founder, the famed chef who founded World Central Kitchen, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. It's entitled, "Let People Eat." And in part, it reads, "In the worst conditions, after the worst terrorist attack in its history, it's time for the best of Israel to show up. You cannot save the hostages by bombing every building in Gaza. You cannot win this war by starving an entire population." And it's on this note we go now to Jonathan Panikoff, director at the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Jonathan, it's always great to have you here on Bloomberg Television and Radio, even though we do have to deal with some pretty heavy stuff. We're talking about even more deaths of humanitarian aid workers. Obviously, there have already been many. There's been deaths of tens of thousands of innocent civilians as well. And there is a growing outcry. It feels almost as if this is something of a turning point in terms of international outrage potentially at Israel and its conduct during this war. Are we about to see something really change here?
Thanks for having me. Always good to be with you. Look, this hits home in a way I think just previous incidents didn't, frankly, to the dismay of many in the Middle East and especially in Gaza. The reality is Jose Andres is a beloved figure in the Washington community. He's incredibly close to the White House. But you had an American killed, you had a British national killed, in addition to Palestinians killed. And so I think it's just really the culmination of a lot of frustration. The Biden administration has been on about this for months now. And you had last month, the stampede, you had multiple Palestinians killed. There's a real question of why up until now hasn't there been a plan that's been effective and been implemented for humanitarian aid distribution? The fact that we're 6 months in and it's still not there, I think rightly is really unnerving folks in Washington to a degree that we haven't seen previously.
Indeed, Washington loves Jose Andres. I can remember when it was the D.C. Central Kitchen before he went worldwide. And Joe Biden, most of the lawmakers we're going to be talking with about this over the coming days have met him. They've probably volunteered at the Central Kitchen here in town. I wonder, to the extent, knowing that he's been in touch with Joe Biden, this is going to influence President Biden's conversation tomorrow with Benjamin Netanyahu. Axios is now reporting that they will speak. What does Joe Biden tell Netanyahu tomorrow when they get on the line?
I think the message is going to be pretty strong and pretty clear. Frankly, the Israelis not only have to allow in more humanitarian aid, they have to massively increase the opportunities for it to get in. So it's not just the seaport that the U.S. is building that's going to take a few months. It means actually opening up maybe every crossing Israel has, and for the Israelis to coordinate in a way they haven't previously. Israel has said they've got a new joint operations center to coordinate with humanitarian organizations providing aid. I think that's going to be critical and should be helpful in ensuring such a tragedy doesn't happen again. But it's very, very late. And it's way past time that it should have happened. And I expect the president to frankly say that to Netanyahu. I think the president's patience is running out. Whether that means that there will be actually a call that if Netanyahu doesn't do this, there'll be some conditions imposed. I think that's a little unknown and what we're all going to be looking for.
Well, I want to expand on that point, Jonathan, because, of course, at the same time, the same day we got news of these 7 aid workers being killed in several Israeli strikes in succession, we got news that the U.S. is pushing ahead with $18 billion in arms sales, including fighter jets for Israel. So if there's no actual stoppage of the lethal aid that in part is empowering Israel to conduct these kind of operations that are having a catastrophic toll on what you could maybe classify as collateral damage, then what leverage does Biden even have really in these conversations?
It's a real challenge. A lot of folks, rightfully, just as you're bringing up, have talked about the U.S. needing to use its leverage. The problem is the U.S. leverage when it comes to Israel is big ticket items that have fundamentally underpinned the U.S.-Israel relationship for years now. So it is major defense hardware,